Welcome to the Banner of Truth magazine podcast, where each week we bring you a reading from the magazine archive for your encouragement and edification. In 1980, the Trust published the Diary of Kenneth A. MacRae, 1912 to 1963, edited by Iain H. Murray. This week's reading is a collection of Mr. MacRae's diary entries. I'm just going to read to you something from the front and end papers of the original volume. It says, "With wide interests and sympathy to enter into both the sunshine and sorrows of his people's lives, MacRae's diary captures not a little of the once dominant culture of the Highlands and the Hebrides. Almost irresistibly, the reader is caught up with his feelings for the land which was as dear to him as life. But for the same reasons as McShane's and Bonner's diaries of the last century captured such a wide readership, this volume will also have an appeal far beyond Scotland. MacRae belongs to that succession of Christian leaders whose influence, in the first place, is due to the fact that they are men who see the King's face, have access to his presence, and whose known standing in the heavenly court gives a solemn authority to all they do. Setting themselves free from human policy and despairing of success by mere influence of talent, they cast themselves on the support of their blessed head and Lord. The diary is thus a powerful witness to the reality of communion with God. It is also the deeply challenging account of a man who refused to accept the inevitability of the decline of historic Christianity, who traced the cause of that decline not to the world, but to the church, and who, regardless of the opinions of his age, held on and inspired others with the conviction that the tide will turn. Here then are thoughts on preaching from the Diary of Kenneth MacRae, which appeared as a special article in the April 1998 issue of the magazine, number 415. The Preacher's Golden Rule. Never preach a sermon which has not sufficient in it used of the Spirit to lead a soul to Christ. Proper preparation. I cannot help observing of late what I have often observed before, that my freedom in public does not depend on my thoroughness in preparation, but upon the spirituality of my mind. Is it not then my wisdom to give more attention to the preparation of the heart before services? The need for spiritual nourishment. I am given to see that only diligent and regular cultivation of my own soul can sustain in me that frame of spirit which I feel so necessary to the effective prosecution of my work. If I lose that spirit, all becomes mechanical, cold, and formal, and I have little heart in the performance of my various duties. The offense of the gospel. The preacher must not be surprised if, in some cases, the effect of his preaching is the opposite of what he expects. Offense or no offense, I shall not cease to proclaim what God has given me. I would rather see a soul leave me because offended at my words than that he should drift calmly into hell without a word of warning from me. The need for faithfulness. What is going to count at the end of the day is not success, but faithfulness. Practicing what we preach. Entering for the ministry means something more than merely preaching the gospel. It means also the consecration of the whole life to the service of God. It means a holiness of walk and conversation far exceeding that expected of a Christian in a less responsible sphere. Preaching to current needs. The necessity of preaching to the needs of our day in the religious life of our land has been pressed upon me by reading of the contendings between the reformers and their successors, both in England and Scotland. I fear that as a church, our preaching is too academic, too negligent of the things that are actually happening in church and nation today. The result is that our people are apt to view these things as they are depicted in the press, and not as they appear when the light of God's word is turned upon them. We are too apt to strive after good and able and popular sermons, rather than the enlightenment and guidance of our people in the perilous times in which we live. Certainly, the gospel is unchanging, but our message ought to be delivered in the light of the day in which we live. Receiving help from others. Found Spurgeon to be a balm poured upon my restless spirit. I do not cease to thank the Lord for his, that is Spurgeon's, according to promise. It effectually showed me my sin and my folly in neglecting the promises, and taught me that I ought in a real, literal manner to take the promises, plead them, expect their fulfillment, and finally, note their fulfillment. Spurgeon says that we should always expect a faithful presentation of the gospel, preached in dependence upon the Lord, to be blessed to someone. I think I will give one of Ryle's tracts to every household in the congregation, with a private message written on the back. Now, just to note, as a side note here, these are my words, not Kenneth MacRae's, that Ryle's tracts were not small evangelistic leaflets as such, but more substantial treatments of gospel subjects or subjects in the Christian life, such as are collected together in a volume like The Upper Room or Knots Untied. I think I will give one of Ryle's tracts to every household in the congregation, with a private message written on the back. Like McShane, that's Robert Murray McShane, I am learning to fear Satan much more than I used to. The perusal of the Diary of Dr. Andrew Bonner has made me aware of how much spiritual benefit may be derived from the keeping of a diary. To prove grace in the soul to the one who has no assurance, I know no book more useful than Guthrie's The Christian's Great Interest. That's William Guthrie, about whom we did an episode not long ago, the Covenanter. I can't remember the title of it. I think it was The Covenanter Who Liked to Laugh. That's William Guthrie's The Christian's Great Interest. Back to Kenneth MacRae. Brainerd's diary I find most helpful. My perusal of it has shown me where I am and the reason for my powerlessness. Oh, that things eternal were more real to me, and that I were able to live with singleness of eye to God's glory. Reading Life of Whitefield. Would that I had his consecration, his faith, his humility, his selflessness, and his power. Reading Whitefield's life makes me long for days of power. Whitefield plied the subject of the new birth so effectively, but in his day it was a new and startling doctrine to the people. Here they have heard it from their youth up. It certainly is as needful as ever. John Angel James says that ministers ought to try to find out the effect of their sermons, and I believe that it would be helpful to do so. But in practice, how is it possible without giving those whom we may consult the impression that we are out for compliments? Would that I knew the effect of my poor sermons. I might know better then how to adapt them to the needs of actual cases in the congregation. To fire at random is not satisfactory. Neither is it likely to ensure efficient campaigning. Have been somewhat impressed by reading W.G.T. Shedd, Sermons to the Natural Man, on the place of fear as a motive of vital religion. I am afraid that I have somewhat overlooked this in recent years. I have found it difficult to preach the sterner aspects of the truth in love, or without being myself somewhat hardened in the process. And I have tended more and more to neglect such subjects. But I am convinced that I am in the wrong. I fear the deceitful heart prefers both to preach and to hear smooth things. Subjective versus objective preaching. In Dr. William Childs Robinson's The Word of the Cross, the conviction is expressed that the secret of successful preaching is the exhibition of the cross. Perhaps it is, and perhaps it is there that I fail. What I delight in is experimental preaching, the application of redemption to the soul, the subjective side as opposed to the objective. And perhaps my partiality leads me to deny the preaching of the cross the place it ought to have in my ministrations. Eager to preach. I am thankful that I am still able to say that I would not wish to live a day longer in the world if I were able no more to preach the gospel. May the day never come when I shall be of a different mind. My own religion is eminently unsatisfactory. And yet I can honestly say that, apart from the work of the ministry, I have no interest in life, and would not wish to live unless I could get to preach Christ to sinners. Learning from difficulty. At a midweek inter-church meeting, I did not get on at all, and found speaking most difficult. It ought to teach me, however, not to be dependent upon the sympathy of my audience, but upon the help of my Lord. The need for assurance. There is a kind of preaching which is peculiarly blessed to the awakening and conversion of sinners. I have often been much impressed with the statement that Paul preached the gospel in power and in much assurance. 1 Thessalonians 1:5. When this expecting spirit, this assurance of success is given, the blessing will surely follow. The need for prayer. Must try again to preserve some time for the interests of my own soul. Much work requires much prayer if it is to be at all productive. The need for patience. What reason I have for gratitude to the Most High, and what reason I have to be patient while sowing the seed. The results may be long in coming to the surface, but the work will not be in vain. The need for humility. All day long, my pride has been feeding itself upon its memories of yesterday, as if I, a vessel of clay, had anything to do with it at all. I am continuing taking to myself the glory which pertains unto the Most High, because of what He has done in me, this miracle of opening my stammering lips to give utterance to the gospel. The Lord shows me that the blessing does not depend upon my sermon, but upon His power. Plowing a straight furrow. God helping me, to the last, my preaching will be Calvary, judgment, and hell. Fishing for men. 1. When you have finished preparation of your sermon, learn to fix hooks to it. Hooks catch fish. Bait with love. 2. Learn to appeal to the young. They are the hope of the church. 3. Learn to let yourself go as to speech. Expect the words to be supplied as you need them. Moving beyond elementary things. Enjoyed speaking from 2 Corinthians 13:14 on the blessing of the Trinity. Feel greatly exercised as to the wisdom of giving sermons deeply doctrinal. I enjoy them exceedingly myself, and I feel an unwanted warmth in delivering them. I know that a few will appreciate them, but the question is, can the bulk of the professing people follow them? Are they useless so far as most are concerned? On the other hand, how can a discerning people be raised up without such teaching? To be always dealing with elementary things gives little prospect of rearing anything but spiritual dwarves. Help from one's greatest critic. I am given to understand that my delivery has become monotonous, mournful, and slow. I believe this is the result of my relaxing, as it were, in the pulpit, under the impression that the Lord would help me. I see the danger of this, that it has a tendency to make me heavy and drowsy. Were it not for my faithful wife, I might have been allowed to remain in this condition until it had become a confirmed habit. It seems that I must not spare myself, but preach with energy and force, and then, having done all in my power, look to the Lord to bless my humble efforts, concentrating on one point. It is a mistake to handle 2 or more points of doctrine in the same sermon. A sermon, I think, should take aim and seek to drive home one great lesson. One point driven home ought to go deeper, humanly speaking, than 2 or 3. To handle several points at once only distracts the attention and dissipates the effect. Boston, I notice, that's Thomas Boston, dealt with each point separately, and I think he did wisely. If a text raised 2 points of doctrine, he then made 2 sermons of it, and I feel that I would do well to follow his example. Withstanding Satan. At the beginning of a service, was very much troubled with worrying thoughts, which cast me into an ill frame, until suddenly the thought flashed through my mind that since I was going to preach against Satan and to incite believers to a greater and more practical zeal against him, in a sermon on 1 Samuel 14:6, this was his attempt to disarm me beforehand. That gave me some relief and some encouragement to look to the Lord for power. I believe that I am too often taking to myself the responsibility for what is really the work of the enemy, and thus I am bringing myself into bondage, because my conscience comes to be burdened with the guilt of such. We are not half aware of the reality of the work of Satan and of his extraordinary subtlety. I am not, at any rate. A balanced approach to church growth. Lord, forgive me for my pride in wanting the congregation to grow. And yet, on the other hand, if I have no expectation, I shall become a poor dead creature with no energy and no hope. I have a right to expect my prayers to be answered, and I pray for this, not for my own glory, but, I hope, for the cause of Christ. Preaching with expectation. How prone one is to conduct services in a more or less mechanical way, as a duty to be performed and no more. How utterly I fail to realize that the Lord has promised to bless his word. Isaiah 55, 10 and 11. And how far I am from the eager expectation of such fruit which such a promise warrants. And since the rule of the kingdom is that we shall have, according to our faith, Matthew 9:29, Psalm 81:10, my barrenness is my own fault. Unbelief is rendering me unfruitful. And surely unbelief in the face of such unambiguous promises is a great sin. O Lord, keep me from sinning against Thee in this matter, and give me faith to expect the word to be blessed among us. The joy of preaching Christ. At night, felt especially happy in preaching Christ and holding Him up before poor sinners. If He gives me liberty to speak, is it not because He means to bless it? Preaching to a small congregation. It is hard to believe that one is sent with a message when there cannot be more than 2 or 3 to receive it. I comfort myself, however, with 3 reflections. 1, that the blessing is not bound to large congregations, that a sovereign Lord can work mightily in the little company. 2, that there were times when Israel was bidden to stand still, and so, no doubt, it will be with his gospel messengers. 3, that it is not for the servant to question the will of his master, but to know that divine wisdom directs all his doings. Saved from despair. Some nights, despite an evening of great power, I would be terribly downcast, feeling that all was in vain. Tonight, I do not feel so, for I seem to realize more that the power is in the hand of another, and if it seems good to him, he will work. Thus, I know not what will come out of today's services, and consequently, I have hope. Evidence of the Spirit's presence. An article I read on one of the Welsh revivals gave as evidence of the Spirit's presence in preaching 1, warmth, 2, the preacher feeling that he is only a channel for the expression of what is pouring out of him. And those were thoughts from the pen of the Reverend Kenneth MacRae, sometime minister for 50 years in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Thank you for listening to the magazine podcast from the Banner of Truth Trust. To subscribe to the magazine in its print or digital formats, or both, please see the show notes or visit banneroftruth.org.